This tutorial is an introduction to Docker and Docker Compose. Docker is a containerization technology enabling you to easily build and deploy applications, while Docker Compose is an orchestration system to build and manage solutions requiring multiple containers. In this tutorial, I will also demonstrate how to take and revert snapshots on CloudKicks. Snapshots are very useful when you are learning a new technology or developing a solution, as they allow you to roll back to a previous snapshot and continue forward again. There are many ways to use Docker, including versions that you can install on a laptop, a physical server, or on a VM. We are going to install Docker on a VM in CloudKicks. We will begin by installing Docker and Docker Compose on the new VM. I have created a new project called Docker Tutorial, and it has one VM called Docker Tutorial. First, I will change the VM name to Docker Tutorial using the command hostnamectl set-hostname docker-tutorial. And I can change the password using the passwd command. It's good practice to update and upgrade the VM before we start working on it. To do this, type sudo apt update && sudo apt upgrade -y. You might like to go through the tutorial more than once, so we will take a snapshot of the VM before Docker and Docker Compose are installed. We will call the snapshot Fresh Ubuntu Install. It's best to wait until the snapshot is complete before installing new software, and this may take a minute or two. Now that our snapshot is complete, it's time to install Docker and Docker Compose. Enter the following commands. To install Docker, type sudo apt install docker. To install Docker Compose, type sudo apt install docker-compose. Once this is done, if you want to check that Docker and Docker Compose have been correctly installed, you can do so by typing docker ---- version and docker-compose ---- version. And from here, I can see that both Docker and Docker Compose are correctly installed. We might take another snapshot here so that we can return the VM to a state with Docker and Docker Compose installed, but no images or containers on board. We'll call this snapshot after Docker and Docker Compose install. In this diagram, you'll see that Docker allows multiple containers to share one guest operating system. As a result, a container is much smaller than a VM. Using Docker and Docker Compose, we will build a number of containers that work together to achieve a solution. Containers are built from images. Think of an image as a blueprint from which a container is built. There are many repositories from which you can download images, but hub.docker.com is both the default and the best known repository. Okay, to see if any images have already been downloaded to our VM, we can use the command sudo docker images. Similarly, the command sudo docker ps will show us a list of any containers on the VM. We can see there are no images or containers on our system yet, so let's build one. Typing sudo docker run hello-world builds the hello world container from the hello world image. If we now run sudo docker images, we can see that the hello world image has been downloaded. However, if we run the sudo docker ps command, we can see there is no container running. This is because the container completed its task and exited. An important point to note here is that if we run the sudo docker run hello world command again, Docker doesn't need to fetch the image from the hub.docker.com repository. Another point to note is that Docker Compose uses the markup language YAML to orchestrate Docker containers, but more of that in a second. Okay, let's download some images to our VM as an example. MariaDB is a commonly used open source database and Nginx is a web server. If we visit hub.docker.com and search for MariaDB, we can see that an image is available. Similarly, if we search for Nginx, an image also exists. In the documentation for both of these images, we can find the YAML to include in our Docker Compose file. The Docker Compose file from MariaDB actually contains two images. One is the database, and the other is an administration tool for the database. So including the two images from MariaDB and one image from Nginx, we can create a Docker Compose YAML file that will orchestrate our containers. Nano is a text editor available on our VM which we can use to create this YAML file. Type nano docker-compose.yml and paste the text for both MariaDB and Nginx we copied from hub.docker.com. Note that the indentation is very important in YAML files. Now that we have this done, let's use Docker Compose to spin all 3 containers. Sudo docker-compose up -d is the command for this. Oh, we have an error. 2 containers are using the same external TCP port. Both are using 8080. To resolve this, we'll need to change one of the port numbers to a different value. Type nano docker-compose.yml to open our YAML file again. The number to the left of the colon is the external port number, and the number to the right is the internal port number. The external port number must be unique within a Docker Compose file. The internal port numbers do not have to be unique. I'm going to change the external port on adminer to 8088. This will resolve our issue. Let's use Docker Compose to spin all 3 containers. Sudo docker-compose up -d is the command for this. Okay, let's open a browser and see if we can reach adminer and nginx using the IP address of our VM and the port numbers. Still no luck. The problem is, we haven't allowed those TCP ports through our firewall. Let's go to CloudKix. We are going to set up 2 firewall rules, one to allow adminer access on port 8088, and the other to allow nginx access on the port 8080. Firewall rules may take a minute or 2 to propagate, just so you know. Okay, let's refresh our browser and see if we can access adminer and nginx. And it looks like we're in business. Let's see what images are downloaded and what containers are running on our VM now. Type sudo docker images to see our images, and sudo docker ps to show the 3 containers that are now running. Finally now, let's revert back to our snapshot after Docker and Docker Compose install. If I run sudo docker images, I can see that no images are installed on this snapshot. And if I run sudo docker ps, I can see no containers are running. However, if I type sudo docker ---- version and sudo docker-compose ---- version, I can see that Docker is still installed. Thanks for watching.